Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Anna Catley, a film editor whose credits include music videos for the tragically hip Mother Mother and Alessia Cara, and feature films like Warren Sonata's Things I Do for Money and Karen Knox's We Forgot to Break Up. Her latest project is Sook-Yin Lee's Paying for It, which I programmed at TIFF last year and is now rolling into Canadian theaters. It's currently playing at the Scotiabank Theatre in Toronto and will return to the Lightbox on Sunday, February 9th as part of Canada's Top 10. If you haven't had the chance to see it yet, it's sweet and funny and quietly weird, and you should check it out. Anna picked Velvet Goldmine, Todd Haynes' 1998 glam-rock reverie starring Christian Bale as Arthur, a reporter assigned to track down a long-vanished performer called Brian Slade, played by Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. As Arthur works to set up interviews with Slade's ex-wife Mandy and his former collaborator Kurt Wilde, played by Toni Collette and Ewan McGregor, respectively, he starts to understand how his own history is tangled up with Slade's legend. And Haynes gets to imagine alternate versions of David Bowie, Iggy Pop, and Klaus Nomi, among others. And even if they're not the real thing, their music's pretty great. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I've loved this movie since I was maybe about 13. I have a very cool aunt who lives in Park City and has been attending Sundance, since it started. And she always comes to me with these great movies. And it's like, I saw this great movie this year called Whiplash. You got to see it one day. Or I saw this. And I really trust her taste in movies. And I remember once when I was about 13, she said, there's this movie that I think you would love called Velvet Goldmine. And I had just gotten into torrenting. It was, 2006 or 7. I don't know when it was, but I went and torrented it. And I just remember, I think my brain exploded a little bit. Just the opening credits alone, all these teenagers running around London with platform boots to Brian Eno's Needle in the Camel's Eye. And I just was like, whoa. This is absolutely my kind of movie. And at that point, I had been really into, I'd gone through kind of a French New Wave phase. I was also deep in a Brian De Palma phase. And I think I just was craving something really flashy and fun. And I think that started my love of kind of movie musicals or not movies that aren't musicals, but are so driven by music. And I've just loved it ever since. I watch it a lot. I recommend it a lot. I hadn't seen it though for at least 10 years, probably until I watched it last night. And that was a really fun experience because I'd been telling my boyfriend, this is me. This was me in high school. You don't even understand. This movie is me. And watching it with another person sitting next to me, I started to feel like what I didn't feel when I would watch it alone in my room and fantasize about Ewan McGregor. But watching it with another person, I was like, oh, I can kind of see where maybe it's a bit clunkier, but I still love it. I just think it's such a fun movie. And that's why I brought it.
I mean, you're describing exactly the same thing that Christian Bale does in the film as Arthur Stewart, right? When he's pointing to, is it Brian Slade or Jack Ferry? He's pointing to someone on the screen and screaming, "That's me! This is me!"
Yeah, I think that was Brian Slade on the screen. Yeah. And he's he fantasizes that that's what he could do. Is he imagines that he stood up in the middle of his parents' living room and says, "That's me! That's me!" And then he's just truly just sitting there, not having been able to say it, but he feels it, which I love that moment, actually.
Yeah, watching it this time, because we watched it last night as well. My wife hadn't seen it in years and years, probably since theatrically. We're a little bit older, and I saw it at a press screening, I think just before TIFF, or maybe just before it opened in 98. And it's got so much going on that every time I see it, it's hard to evaluate as anything other than an incoherent blast of energy and emotion. It's everything at all at once.
Yeah.
About glam rock. And Todd Haynes is laying out all of these composite characters and these imposters and just throwing them at each other. And this time through, it's is Bale, is Arthur closeted? is he out? Like, who is he as a person? And then I realized, well, it's 1984 in America. Of course, he's closeted.
Mhm.
This is this was made only 14 years later and a quarter century after the most of the events that happened. And that was really stunning to me, realizing just how far cinema has come, even Haynes's cinema, where what Far From Heaven's like 5 years away from this, where he can have Dennis Quaid play a closeted gay character in a Douglas Sirk movie, but someone who is swearing and depicted as acting sexually. And this just, it's got sex and it's got, pansexuality, homosexuality, straight sex. It's all over the map
Mhm.
in terms of what it's showing you. But then I realized, oh, I've only ever seen the American cut. There is a longer version and I've never seen it. It's only 4 minutes longer, but of course, this was a Miramax release, and Harvey Weinstein went for it and made
Yeah.
sure it was a palatable R-rated version. So suddenly, it's like, shit, I have to get hold of the international version because I realized I've never seen the uncut version of the film.
I think I need to see that version too. I didn't even realize that I had. I mean, I knew I'd read about Miramax,
Famously, yeah.
yeah, burying it and all of these things and the infamous like Weinstein cuts. But I actually don't know what version. I have my DVD and
Yeah, yeah. If you have the
what version
DVD and
that
I have the
there is.
Blu-ray, if it's 119 minutes, that's the short version.
You have, oh, I wish I had a Blu-ray. I just have this little version. Mine says 119 minutes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that someone is working on it now that the Miramax library rights have been dealt with. I mean, hopefully we'll see a Criterion edition before too long.
Yes. I literally was saying that the other day to my boyfriend after we were watching it. I was like, I feel like this is prime for Criterion. Like this movie would have so much of a life with Criterion. It deserves it.
Yeah, and it's not forgotten exactly, but it is kind of a lesser known Haynes film, even though it's like the most Todd Haynes film. It's got a scene where he recreates like he references the Karen Carpenter movie he made with Barbie dolls,
Yep.
um, and does it in a way that is chaste, which I think is adorable compared to all the other stuff that's flying around in the movie. I mean, this is the prime Ewan McGregor frontal nudity window, where between 1996 and 1999, there's this great line in Coupling about Helen Mirren in the 80s. It's like her breasts are afraid of the dark. That was Ewan McGregor's junk. And to the point where it's like, oh, right, it's a long shot. That doesn't feel right. It's usually much closer up. And I'm thinking, of course, it's in the other cut. But the fact that this film did not explode into scandal on release in 1998 has always been weird to me, because it is, I think, more than any other movie Todd Haynes has made, it is the one where he is most trying to recreate a shocking milieu. I don't think he's out to shock people, but
Mhm.
he is trying to convey the arrival of glam rock and what that queerness and libertine nature felt like during the Nixon years. I mean, this is like, it's a completely different world that this stuff is crashing into.
Totally.
And so the film is doing its best to convey the sense of shock, but not be shocking itself.
Hmm.
And maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's why it didn't explode at the time, because it was recreating moments that felt more shocking to the people who had lived through them.
Yeah, maybe. And I also feel like that like I think that there was a lot of I didn't have great like reviews when it first came out and all. I think sometimes when there's a climate of just like kind of commentary about a film and it's not really positive leading up to a film actually landing, it's like Solo, the Star Wars movie. I just feel like I was so prepared for it to be so bad, and we all just kind of agreed it's not going to be. And I saw, I love Solo. I think Solo's a really fun movie, and I think it never had the life it actually deserved because it was shrouded with all this like bad, not, I guess, bad press. And like, I feel like Velvet Goldmine also had a little bit of that going on. And it also had this, people were talking about how this was supposed to be a David Bowie biopic, but it wasn't allowed. And I think that maybe people who knew about Bowie and Iggy Pop and all these things felt like this was like a cheap rendition of it when it's really not that. Like that's it. I know it set out to be a bit more of a David Bowie biopic, but it's to me it's just it's like the dreams of this generation. It's not, it obviously has a lot of references and very like obvious homages and pastiches and all that. But it was really doing its own thing. I feel like I feel bad that it didn't have like explode in the way that I think it should have. But in another world, I kind of understand what people have a problem with it. It, like you said, it kind of is just like this like mess of, it's a big montage and it jumps back and forth a million times. And, and like I was saying, watching with my boyfriend, I was kind of like aware of like the moments where I was like, maybe this isn't like totally working. But then I'm just trying to remember what it's like to watch it on my own and just remember without another person's opinion next to me how much I love it and how along for the ride I always was. So it's one of those movies that I keep like coming back to because I think it's just the vibe and the energy, honestly. Like that's half the movie for me. It's just vibes.
Yeah, it is it's a really odd proposition from the very beginning and dislocated in a kind of fascinating way to me. I either never noticed or didn't mind that New York is like London plays New York in a couple of scenes, absolutely unconvincingly. Like those scenes at the Herald where Arthur is introduced working, that's not in any way anything other than London in the 90s. The light's wrong, the cars are on the wrong side of the road, everything just. Haynes makes a couple of choices early on. First, there's a little bit of a radio broadcast where they mention a different president. It's like President Reynolds or Renforth or something.
Yeah, Reynolds, yeah, like a fake president. Yeah.
Instead of Reagan in 1984 in New York. And then that just starts it sort of cushions the mismatches in a way that made sense to me, that this isn't quite, it's fine that Brian Slade is neither David Bowie nor Mark Bolan. Like he is his own person. He is who would have shown up if the other two hadn't made it. And you can see ideas. It's like now in retrospect, it's like a Llewyn Davis situation, right? Like it's about the world that produces these people and who rises to the challenge at the right moment. And maybe because of the fun little gimmick of Oscar Wilde's brooch, maybe this is who it would have been or who it could have been. And so you see this like this cross-pollination of inspiration moving back and forth. And that makes it fine for me. I think the world isn't the world we know. And it's totally normal that all of this stuff happened to other people. And that Kurt Wilde can sing an Iggy Pop song and basically be Iggy Pop, even though the thing that stuns me this time through is just how much Ewan McGregor is styled to look like Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, I had also never really made that association back when I first was watching it. But this last time I watched it, I was also wondering if that was at all part of the, I don't know, the idea behind Kurt Wilde. I actually don't know. But it did strike me as wondering whether Kurt Cobain was any inspiration, because Kurt Cobain would have died a few years before this movie came out.
Maybe 3 or 4, yeah.
Pretty fresh, yeah. Yeah. He looks exactly like him with the bleach blonde hair.
Yeah, and the eyeshadow and even some of the stuff that McGregor just does with his face has that hooded look that Cobain would get when his hair fell the right way. It feels like Haynes is trying to say something about the cyclical nature of inspiration and how, I don't know that there's a lot of Bowie in Nirvana, but then you hear them play The Man Who Sold the World, and it's like, yeah, okay, it's all in there. It's all just rattling around in the world, waiting to be picked up again, over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Haynes would be drawn to. I like his work is always so dense and thoughtful and filled with idea. Or ideation. I don't even know how to explain it. But he's a semiotician by trade. He wants to pick something apart in front of us and show us how it works and where it came from. So even here, like the scene where they actually sing Satellite of Love and Kurt Wilde is the one mouthing the Bowie bit, is this weird cross-pollination of thoughts and emotions and pulls, because it is this beautiful romantic moment that makes no sense for these characters, right? Like the world slows down and they're running on bumper cars or some kind of an amusement
Yeah,
park,
or
right?
like yeah,
It
carousel or something. Yeah.
yeah, it defies a rational interpretation, but
Mhm.
that's where the music is taking them, and it makes perfect sense emotionally what in the moment, and that I think maybe that's why it fell sideways for people, because there is this, as we've seen over the last 25 years of music biographies,
Mhm.
people want to watch the actor they like play the character they like playing the music they like the people will settle for that as a mass audience experience.
Yeah.
And when Todd Haynes strikes out on his own rather, and says, well, I'm going to follow Safe, this incredibly powerful indie that's won a bunch of awards and kind of ratified Julianne Moore as an incredible performer, and I'm going to go make a movie about glam rock.
Hmm.
People wanted to see all the stories they've heard about played by famous faces. And instead, we get this where Toni Collette hadn't broken yet. Ewan McGregor was kind of buzzy, but hadn't really. I mean, this is a year before Star Wars, which is
Yeah.
as
Wild to
terrible a
think
leap as
about.
that is. Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Well,
oh, that's right. This is what made him a global personality. Like it
yeah.
wasn't Trainspotting, which I loved, but which tanked
Mhm.
ultimately in the American market. Um, and Toni Collette hadn't broken yet, and Christian Bale was the kid from Newsies, right? Like there
Yeah, he was
was
like the child star. It's like Empire of the Sun. Oh,
right.
that guy. On had he done? He had done Little Women, I think, at that point.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was 94, I think.
Yeah. So like, but you know, all these kind of more. He's like the child star, like kind of like more mild guy. Yeah, it's crazy to imagine that only I don't know 8 years after this movie came out, he's playing Batman.
Yeah.
It's absolutely wild. I was going back through because I feel like I've documented my life on the internet my always ever since I was like 12. So I was like, I wonder, like, I feel like I would have posted online about Velvet Goldmine before. And so I was going back through my old Tumblr and my old Facebook. And sure enough, I'm like writing on people's walls, OMG, you have to watch this movie. And like sending like needle in the camel's eye to my friend on YouTube, being like, do you even know who Brian Eno is? And I went on my Tumblr and I found this. I used to make GIFs, of my favorite movies. I had a whole Tumblr that was just me taking little images I liked from movies. And I made this post that was quite popular. I went back, I was like, oh, wow, it's got like thousands of reactions. And it's this little set of Christian Bale in Velvet Goldmine right after he's dumped his plaid coat, behind in his parents' garden, and he's wearing this little crop top with all these buttons, and he's kind of walking through the streets, and he slowly starts to like get his swagger and looks like he's feeling it's almost like his like verbal kint moment, he starts to like unravel as he's walking.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just like I titled it Batman the Early Years. I was like, yeah, I thought it was so clever. I was like, I love, I don't really have as much of an internet footprint anymore, which makes me kind of sad that I don't document my love of movies in the same way as I did back when I was 14. But I loved going back and finding all these little things, all these little, I don't know, teenage like adorations about Christian Bale and Velvet Goldmine, or Ewan McGregor was my favorite. Because I actually, you say terrible movie, Phantom Menace. There was a moment where I considered bringing that movie to you.
Oh
As
yeah.
I love. I acknowledge it's a terrible movie, but I love it with all my heart. And Ewan McGregor in that movie. I think it's amazing that they even cast him as Obi-Wan after Velvet Goldmine, to be honest. But I'm glad they did.
Yeah, I obviously Star Wars is my Star Wars, but for a generation that came after me, of course.
I like how you say Star Wars is my Star Wars, not Star Wars and New Hope is my Star Wars. You refuse to use a New
It's
Hope.
not what it was called.
No, I know, and I
I
love
was
you for
there.
that, Norm. I think that that's really on brand, and I love that.
Oh my God, no, I was there. I remember hearing about the episode 5 thing as a kid, and like I would have been 11 and thinking that is the dumbest idea. I know this isn't going to work. And then watching him backfill, it's like, nope, the series starts where it starts for a reason. But yeah, I understand also that the Phantom Menace wasn't made for me, right? Like it's that reaction that everybody has to every generation of Star Wars, where these are always made for kids. Although I think The Force Awakens does a much better job of playing with nostalgia and building things into it. But
totally. Well, and Force Awakens is essentially just a rehash of A New Hope. It's
oh, yeah.
And I was happy about that. I was like, you know what, this is exactly what people needed, actually. They just wanted to see A New Hope again, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It had been 20 odd years. It's a perfectly fine to, well, longer really, but since the prequels, like, you know, it's okay to start up again from and remind people why they love a thing, but also a generation of kids who had maybe seen the original trilogy got to see the Phantom Menace on a big screen for the first time, and right, exactly, and just have their heads exploded by it, which yeah. is not like, it is not nothing that could happen again, that Lucas could pull that off. I don't like the prequels. I think the last hour of Revenge of the Sith finally gets to the story that's worth telling. But I do acknowledge, I saw Phantom Menace at the Eglinton Theater of Blessed Memory on the Wednesday before it opened, and it was a preview screening, and the room was wired, and people had brought kids, and the kids stayed with it, and you could see, like, okay, this is working for them at a level that I cannot abide, but that's irrelevant, right? Like, it's not made for me.
Well, and I think the problem with Phantom Menace is that they tried to make it a thing for kids and for adults. They're like, well, what if we bring in the Senate and trade embargoes and stuff that kids don't understand what that is, and it just doesn't work. It's not enough. It's not compelling enough to engage the adults, and the kids can kind of tune out until the next pod race, which is great.
Although now, of course, all the tariff stuff seems weirdly relevant. So I guess I owe George Lucas an apology.
Are we the Naboo?
I hope not.
I hope not, too.
I don't respect their government.
No. Yeah. Anyway, this is now a Phantom Menace podcast.
I was going to say, it is sort of, it is weirdly relevant because the Phantom Menace is the thing that's dominating the culture when Velvet Goldmine opens. The trailer had come out like within weeks of it. It was attached to Babe, of all things, the Babe sequel. Which, again, one of those things that nobody remembers. And Babe, Pig in the City, also no one's done that for the podcast yet, which is just an absolute masterpiece from George Miller. But
movie. George Miller, like, what can't he do? Truly.
Yeah.
And Babe on its own is a fantastic movie. I love Babe.
Yeah, that one's come on. Josephine Decker did that one. That's a good episode.
Oh, cool.
But the world isn't looking for Velvet Goldmine in that moment. I think that's the thing that I keep thinking about now, is that maybe the point is that he did it too early. He did it too soon. The thing that really hit me this time through watching it is, like, with the exception of Iggy Pop, all of these models are dead. All of the characters he's based his world on, all of the real people are gone now. And maybe now is when we could use a more fantastical, more surreal interpretation, because I don't know if you saw the film with what's his name, Johnny Flynn playing Bowie. I think it's called Stardust. It was about Bowie's first American tour. It's not good. It's once again, they could not license the music. The estate refused. So the producers just had him singing all the covers, all the songs that Bowie would have been singing at the time when he wasn't singing his own music. And the larger result, in addition to the fact that Johnny Flynn looks and sounds nothing like David Bowie and was at least 10 years too old to play the part, it's just the sense that no film can capture this presence. So why are you even trying?
Right. So and in that sense, I think Velvet Goldmine works so much better because it's like, they're not trying to capture anything realistically. They're trying to evoke a feeling of what it might have been like to be in that era with this music and these kinds of people, which is, it makes so much more sense to me. Like, I love these unauthorized kind of biography worlds. I think it can help you understand the people so much better when you're kind of framing them as these characters who, it's not totally real. Like, maybe some things are real, maybe take what you want. I think it works really well. It's I know it's had some controversy over the years, but I was really drawn to Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story that Todd Haynes did. And I love that you mentioned the Barbie doll scene, because I had forgotten about that scene in this movie. And I think it's because I hadn't seen this movie since I saw Superstar. And
And
so it
so,
wouldn't have struck me when I watched Velvet Goldmine for the first time that this was a reference. But, Todd Haynes is, the intertextuality king and self-referential. And I love that. Um, and I love that I think people thought that Superstar was kind of a cruel movie because, he's physically whittling away this Barbie doll to show us what happened to Karen Carpenter. And I think it's actually shows just how cruel, like presenting her as a Barbie doll shows like these crazy expectations on her. And then showing her physically get smaller and smaller, I think it evokes so much sympathy to me and like empathy. And I feel like I just like want to hug Karen Carpenter. I don't feel like it. I feel like it really did justice to her story in this weird Barbie doll movie that's 30 minutes long about Karen Carpenter. I think it was really beautiful. I really like Todd Haynes and how much empathy he approaches these characters with.
oh,
Always.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Superstar, if it had been a 5 minute joke, absolutely would have been the movie that people thought it was. But the fact that we have to sit there and watch it play at
Hmm.
length and understand what's going on, it's the same way that his Velvet Underground documentary uses film texture and editing to demonstrate like visually the way the band sharpens into its best versions of itself and how and where it comes from and where it ends up going. And once Lou Reed goes off on his own to just do rock and roll music the way he originally wanted to, like he was a doo-wop guy from the beginning, and it just becomes this conventional thing at the very end and then bursts back into experimental. He's always telling you how to watch the thing you're watching.
Hmm.
And with Velvet Goldmine, like he's in love with the texture of 16 millimeter and the sense that you're catching things you're not supposed to see in the same way the music is giving you access to a movement, a vibe, an impulse, a feeling that had previously been held back. The thing that
Hmm.
I'm always stunned about in these things is that Bowie comes out of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Like he was the next British movement.
Hmm.
Um, and those two together, like the Stones and the Beatles, are incredibly conventional bands that just became like the I don't even know, like heightened versions of themselves while they were doing the thing they were doing. The Beatles, by
Hmm.
separating outwards and doing the things separately on the White Album and Abbey Road, like but by the time Lennon and McCartney were pursuing their own fields and George Harrison was off making quasi-religious music and Ringo Starr was just goofing around,
Yeah. What's Ringo Starr ever doing? I don't know.
he's having a great time.
Yeah, you know what? He's just living his best life. I don't know what Ringo Starr's ever up. I know what all the other guys are up to or were up to.
Mm-hmm.
Ringo Starr, I have no idea what Ringo Starr's up to. He's just there.
He's happy to be part of the
He's just
room,
happy
right?
to be there.
He's got access to this incredible level of production and talent, and people are coming in and making his music better. He's having the best time.
Yeah, there's this moment in Hard Day's Night that makes me laugh every time where it's like the interviewer's like, do you think Ringo Starr is the best drummer in the world? And I don't remember who responded, but one of them says, he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
Yeah, I think it's John. That sounds like
Yeah, it
something
sounds like a
John would
John thing to
say.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah. But then Bowie comes through and has the rock drive, has the production chops, and is just weird and is just willing to like. Have you? There's this horrible song he wrote called "The Laughing Gnome" that I think was his first hit before he was really established, and it's a children's song. It's a novelty song, and it is atrocious in a really specific British twee way that had he followed that line, he never would have become David Bowie. And I think Velvet Goldmine is set in a world where that's what happened, where he never got to the place that Brian Slade takes, that he conquers by getting the brooch from Jack Ferry, who I think is supposed to be Klaus Nomi, but might also just be the spirit of glam. I don't fully understand what's going
I
on with Jack Ferry.
I don't Jack Ferry. I mean, I feel like the name is a reference to Brian Ferry, but
But
I
that's
don't
not the
think
music he makes, and that's not the
he doesn't
yeah.
resemble Brian Ferry in any way. Yeah, I don't know. Jack Ferry's such an interesting character in this movie because he's always there. He's always kind of like around the corner observing because I feel like I don't know which, like, I know this is kind of going off what you're saying, or I don't know who if he's meant to represent anybody because I feel like he's almost this this person that can never be. He's the person who stays authentic the entire time.
That's what I was thinking too. Like
Always watching, and everyone else is changing around him. You know, the brooch. I'm wearing a necklace today that I feel like evokes the Oscar Wilde brooch.
I saw that.
The brooch passes to all these different people, and it's Jack didn't even need it. This brooch bestowed on him by Oscar Wilde that gives him his sparkle. He always had that. He never needed this kind of like extra power, and he's always authentic throughout the whole movie. And no one else you could argue that everyone else just kind of changes with what's popular or changes with the times. And there's no one really like that. Like everyone evolves, like every band, like the Beatles, they started this like with their suits and their specific style, and then they kind of evolve. Like there's no world where you don't evolve. You can't stay, like there's no such thing as this one version of authenticity. So it's like he's kind of just this, I don't know, omnipresence that's not really real, Jack Ferry.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the Blu-ray arrivals of Cohen Media Group's My Name is Alfred Hitchcock and A24's Heretic, and there's a lot more coming down the pike. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. It strikes me that he's the non-commercial version of the thing, right? Like he is too real to be successful at the same scale. Although everybody loves him and he's always clearly invited. He's everywhere at once. Mm-hmm. He's just too, and that's why I think, and I'm also part of it is the look, but I think Klaus Nomi comes to mind there for me because this is the guy who was just too weird. He was a magnificent stage presence, incredible voice, but never had the popular success. Like he had backing vocals on The Man Who Sold the World when Bowie did it on Saturday Night Live, which is the single weirdest sentence you could come up with. I
actually don't know who Klaus Nomi is.
That's kind of my point. Like he did not crest in the same way. But there's a documentary about him from maybe 2005 or 6 called The Nomi Song, Nomi, which you should absolutely seek out, and people listening will probably want to look it up too, because it is exactly the story that I imagine Jack Ferry had and that I'm pretty sure Todd Haynes is thinking about. It's somebody who is so unique and so determined not compromise, but even be assimilated into mainstream culture, that he just was never going to be a success in the same way that the mainstream needed in that moment, but that he absolutely pointed the direction out for a lot of people who just picked it up and ran with it in maybe a more attractive way or a more palatable way, while still pushing boundaries on their own. Nomi was just too strange to ever record, a hit. He would be part of them, but he never really had the interest in doing a mainstream. He wouldn't put a single out. That's just not what he did. Wow.
Yeah, it sounds exactly like what we're talking about. Yeah, I have to look him up.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating, quietly tragic story, because it always is. But it's not a rise and fall story. It's a very, very different kind of arc, because he never rose. He was there though. If you look back, he's everywhere. And so the fact that, the actor who played Jack Ferry is named Miko Westmoreland, who, so far as I know, doesn't even have a wiki page. It just was someone that Haynes could tap to do this, and be quietly serene and strange. I always forget that it's Janet McTeer doing the narration too, because she sounds exactly like Tilda Swinton. She hits that precise, refined thing at the beginning, and we never hear from her again. She just reads the intro. But for a while, I was trying to figure out if Miko Westmoreland is Tilda Swinton, in just some kind of weird meta in joke, but it's not her. Because, of course, I still believe that Tilda Swinton may actually be David Bowie.
I would love for Tilda Swinton to play David Bowie in a movie.
It's the one missing piece. She could absolutely. I met her once, and she has the bearing. She has the sense of humor.
Facial structure.
Exactly. They are eerily similar.
Yeah. Oh man. Now that you've said it, now that you spoke it into the world,
Let's hope.
I mean, might be a little late. Is she a little, maybe, she could play like Bowie the later years,
Yeah,
maybe.
I'd want
Yeah,
to watch that. I'd
yeah.
watch that. A film
Totally.
about late era Bowie still doing stuff and being quietly relevant, wandering around New York with a German newspaper tucked under his arm, because that way, if someone came up to him, he would say in German, "No, I'm not David Bowie," and have the newspaper as evidence. It's brilliant when you think about it.
That that's iconic. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you saw this when you were 13.
Yep.
Formative experience? I mean, clearly, but
Oh yeah.
what else were you watching at
What
the
else
time?
was I
Like
watching?
what else were you seeing? What were you into? Like did this
Uh,
clarify something for you, or was it like a lightning bolt?
no, you know what I was very into at the time was um I feel like so I wasn't really aware of glam rock as a movement or anything. I grew up with a very new wave 80s mom.
Okay.
And so but I did like Roxy music a lot. But I was watching a lot of Wes Anderson at that age. And I was obsessed with The Life Aquatic. That was my favorite movie. And that entire soundtrack is Bowie in Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Still one of my favorite soundtracks. But I think, and alongside watching a lot of Wes Anderson movies, I was watching, I guess I watched The Untouchables was like my big movie back then as well. I watched that quite often. I like there was a point where I like rented it from Rogers Video and I went back the next week and got it again and I kept getting it. I don't know why. I have no idea why, because now I'm a big De Palma fan now and think about, oh, I love Body Double and I love Phantom of the Paradise. And I don't know what it was about The Untouchables that like struck me at 13. But I specifically at that time I was really really into movies that weren't necessarily musicals but had a big musical presence, so like Life Aquatic. And then my mom, we had this like CD player in our living room which had 5 CDs you could put in it, and always in the CD player was the Garden State soundtrack and Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack.
Okay.
And so I think I was at that, and I think we had Empire Records at one point. But I think that when I saw Velvet Goldmine, it was just this like explosion of everything I loved. It was like this movie that had this incredible, vibrant soundtrack, and I felt like every time I listened to the soundtrack, I was brought back to the movie. And I think that that's what I loved so much about it when I was 13 was this world created by music.
So I'm guessing this is the first Todd Haynes film you would have seen, right? Because it's just, if you're 13, you're not regularly coming across his work.
Yeah. Yeah. And Todd Haynes, like, I wouldn't have been watching, like, say, for Far From Heaven. Yeah. Would I have seen, I maybe would have seen I don't know if I would have seen I'm Not There at that point. No, this is probably the first Todd Haynes movie I saw for sure. And yeah, it's really fun to watch it again because I feel like so much of what I love as an editor is in this movie. The kind of mixed media format, this like mashup, this kind of like hyper stylized kinetic edit with this, and I love a musical edit. Like that's what I feel like I've always been drawn to that, and I feel like people seek me out for it almost now, which is great. Is something that has a musicality to it, and maybe that's why this movie hit me so hard at that age, is because I was just discovering, I was editing little things on my computer. I was making fan edits of movies I liked. And I didn't realize it was a job that I could do. I wouldn't realize that until I was like 22. But I loved the way it was presented, this kind of like messiness, because rock and roll and love and sexuality is messy, and this movie is kind of messy, but in a really great way, I think. And yeah, I think it really struck me. I think that this movie like is a movie that I come back to a lot. I think about a lot in terms of my own editing style, and so I think I think it was really formative in that way as well.
So the I'm 13. Just, I know the kids grow up faster these days, but 13 strikes me as so young to see a movie like this.
I watched I didn't grow up with TV really. My mom, we didn't have TV. We grew up on movies. My grandmother would watch Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals with me and MGM movies. I would my favorite movies to watch would be like Oklahoma and West Side Story. My mom likes to tell the story of how I would go to preschool with a VHS copy of West Side Story. It was like almost like a teddy bear or something. Like I had to write my name on in Sharpie on it so I wouldn't lose it. So I don't know. I think I've just always been really drawn to film. I'm kind of everyone in my family seems to like movies, but everyone has their own genre, and I just kind of grabbed it all. My brother was watching Memphis Belle and Patton, and I was 9 and had to also watch Memphis Belle and Patton and Pearl Harbor. And, my mom was Star Wars and, action comedies. My nana was the musicals, and I just kind of grabbed it all. And my mom also tells the story about how she was worried that I was watching too many movies at a certain point. I had my own laptop and I had DVDs, and I would spend my allowance at HMV and buy a movie from the $5 bin every week that I'd never heard of. And that was like my little ritual.
That's cool. That's a really
It was
good.
fun. I still have a lot of those DVDs. It's how I watched Bill and Ted for the first time. It's how I saw Unforgiven. It's how I saw Rocky. But yeah, my mom was worried that I was rotting my brain in some way. And someone told her that if you do 10,000 hours of something, it means you're an expert. And so my mom, I think when I was pretty young, kind of recognized that what I was doing wasn't necessarily brain rotting. It was probably a little brain rot, but there was also like another layer to it where where I was educating myself in like this way that not many moms or people would understand as being something that's I'm preparing for a future. But she somehow recognized it and allowed me to kind of continue in that path. And I'm like so grateful, because in the wrong hands, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. I can't do anything else. It has to be movies. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I turned out the same way.
Yeah.
There's there is no other way
No,
forward.
no, no. That's like my air. Like I need it to
Yeah.
breathe.
The way I've always framed it is because my grandfather had a movie theater when I was a kid, and it just, you watch people watching a movie through the window of a projection booth as a child, and that's forever going to bend you in some way. But it's the language we speak, I think,
Mhm.
right? Like it is like learning another language, editorially, visually, aesthetically. And that's what I meant about seeing Velvet Goldmine when you're 13, because Todd Haynes is speaking it in a different accent. Like he works at a different register than anybody else in the English
Mhm.
language anyway. Um, and I assume it's like watching Bowie for the first time. It's like his
Mhm.
movies are that sense of, oh, there's another world, there's another way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. I haven't really thought about it in this way because but I feel like yeah, 13, it's probably a young age to watch something like this, but it's like it's coming off the tails of watching a lot of traditional kinds of films, like
Mm.
things that are more conventional or classic. And this probably was one of the first times I was really shaken up by form in a film, something that was totally different. Like I said, I earlier, I was obsessed with The Untouchables, which is a very classic gangster movie. Um, and I still love it, but it's, a lot of the films I was watching before that, even Wes Anderson, he's unconventional, he's quirky, but he's still pretty conventional in his narrative style.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty linear, not super hard to wrap your head around what the format of that film is. Whereas Velvet Goldmine is kind of just this like, it's like you're throwing up all of these references and you're jumping around. And yeah, you're so right. I've never thought about it like that. So you've expressed it in a much cleaner way. But yeah, it probably was the first time I was shaken up by format in a film. So that's very cool.
And it's an exciting film to be shaken up by, right? Like it is just, as you say, it opens with all this energy and then it just gets quieter and quieter as it goes along. The one
Mhm.
thing that struck me watching it, well, the one thing, one of several things, but the thing that struck me last night about the structure is it's so weird that faking your assassination would lose you fans.
Yeah, that also was interesting to me because I know David Bowie pulled a stunt like that, right? But he it was obvious to people that it was a stunt.
He was
Whereas
killing off a persona rather than.
yeah, I was, this is I'm no longer Ziggy Stardust. Um Whereas Brian Slade wasn't killing off Maxwell Demon. He was tricking people into thinking he'd actually been shot. But you're right. It's like, I think about if this happened now, would a bunch of people like stop being your fan? Or would there be a bunch of people online be like, wow, that was so iconic. You really had me. Like, I think that's actually how people would react. But I don't know what it would have been like, in the 70s, in this imagined 70s, Maxwell Demon being killed off or Brian Slade being killed off, if people actually would have had that kind of reaction. I don't know. It seems like a bit of an overreaction. That's for sure.
Yeah, it feels like the device that gives you the Citizen Kane structure, right? Like the whole thing is about sending someone into his own past as well as the character's past to find out where he is and who he's ended up as. And I think that's the one thing about the film that diffuses itself in a way that doesn't necessarily work. I mean, I think that's why people couldn't connect to it. And ultimately, the answer that is provided, and I think we can discuss it at least peripherally for a 25-year-old film, there's no such thing as a spoiler anymore. But the revelation of where Brian Slade ended up is not nearly as interesting as it needs to be to give the film an ending, because that's not what Haynes cares about. Haynes cares about Arthur, and Arthur kind of gets lost because he's not an interesting enough personality to compete. And Bale, we know now, is an incredibly gifted recessive actor. But he is giving exactly the wrong performance for a movie that needs to have him at the center.
Well, and that's the thing. He is the protagonist of this movie. It's about Brian Slade and Kurt Wilde, but the thing that you're right, the thing that anchors everything, it doesn't actually anchor it super well. And it's interesting. I really think it's cool kind of revisiting this movie now after not having seen it for a while, because in my brain, when I was thinking about, I want to talk about Velvet Goldmine, I'm like, I love this movie. It's like perfect. And watching it now, I'm like, actually, it's not, there's some things I actually don't agree with now as someone who's now cut a couple of feature films and has been around this world. And I'm not, a 19-year-old posting on my Tumblr about how much I love it. It's like, I'm actually recognizing its faults now. And the big thing I came away with too is exactly what you're saying is I actually didn't even remember the Tommy Stone thing. I knew that Brian Slade had reinvented himself. I remembered that part, but I didn't remember that it was like a big deal. Like I didn't remember that there was this weird secrecy and, Kurt Wilde wasn't allowed to talk about it. And everyone was like, no one talks about Tommy Stone. And everyone was acting so, like scared about this reveal. And I didn't feel any of that tension. I really wish that they had managed to make it more compelling. I also just wish that they had not cast somebody else to play Tommy Stone. I wish that they had just put some sort of, I was thinking like about maybe if they'd done like an Orville Peck sort of thing where his face is lower half of his face is covered and it's still Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. But they didn't do it very effectively. Whereas, the Joseph Cotton character in Citizen Kane, like that works. That's the angle. Like they really managed to make that work. And every time you go back to Charles Foster Kane, you're like, you understand what's going on and you're along for the ride. But in this movie, Arthur isn't really that strong of an anchor. But I love when we see him as a teenager. Like that's all very compelling. But the 1984 dystopian Arthur is definitely the least compelling part of this whole movie.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, paradoxically enough, this is the only movie I really like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers in. I think he's perfect for Brian Slade because I found him to be like ultimate, and it's probably more about the marketing of him and the way that he would just exclusively have his one pouty face on every poster and every clip that I've ever seen, and all the things like the Tudors that I've watched him in, where it's just like, this is your deal, right? This is the thing they cast you for. He may have incredible range. I've just never been able to see it. But here, where he's playing someone who is hiding behind the pouty face and the affectations, it's great casting.
Totally. I was thinking the same thing because I also was obsessed with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers when I was a kid. Bend It Like Beckham was one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
He's good in that movie because nothing's demanded of him more than being, again, a beautiful man. That's his thing. And I loved the Tudors growing up. I wonder how I'd feel about it now. I was obsessed with the Tudors as a royal family historically. And so I loved the show no matter what. But basically I feel the same way about his casting because there was a moment where I was like, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers isn't really that strong of an actor, but I think that he works so well in this role because there's so much of this movie is about like seeing someone you admire and then absorbing some of that persona and like taking that and, are you truly authentic? Like all of these kinds of like conversations come up in this movie. And so not really knowing whether Jonathan Rhys Meyers is truly being himself or maybe his like lack of range as an actor really adds to this character
Yeah, yeah.
because he can't really do much more. He's kind of like, I kind of look at his eyes and I see they're a little dead. And that really works for Brian Slade because what does he have? What light does he have within him that makes him Brian Slade? Well, there really isn't. Maybe there just isn't one. Like he puts on these costumes and these personas, and like that's kind of the idea of the movie is like, he sees Kurt Wilde and he's like, I want to be that person. He even goes so far as to bring him over and wants to record with him. And is like disappointed by how all that turns out. But he just yeah, I think it's really great casting. I agree with you. I think it's probably a mean thing to say like, oh, the casting's really good for this because Jonathan Rhys Meyers is kind of dead inside, but it totally works. And he does a great job performing as well. Like I think he actually does get into the groove of the glam rock vibe, especially when he's performing the Ballad of Maxwell Demon and that amazing kind of like pompadour look.
Oh, yeah.
He's great. He gets into it. He absolutely gets into it.
Yeah. And the songs are convincing riffs on that era and specifically Bowie and Mark Bolan, but he does have the rhythms. Yeah, you're right. He can actually channel it.
I think he was actually singing too.
He was, yeah. He and McGregor are both credited with their own vocals, along with a murderer's row of like I keep forgetting half of Radiohead is in this movie.
Yeah, I think Tom York did some of the vocals for Ewan McGregor, didn't he?
Or at least, yes, he sings. He sings Ladytron. York sings one of the Brian Ferry numbers.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
Teenage Fan Club is in there singing Personality Crisis, and it's just it shouldn't work, but it does. Like this giant mix master of 4 years of music.
Mm-hmm. As a young person watching this movie for the first time, I actually didn't really realize that a lot of these weren't originals.
Oh yeah.
For a long time, 20th Century Boy to me was a song by I think it was Placebo.
Yep.
Yeah. Had no other concept of it until I think and then I remember seeing Billy Elliot and learning about T-Rex, and I was like, okay, yeah, T-Rex. I think that's who. I'm probably going to embarrass myself by not actually knowing any of the actual singers because I grew up with the Velvet Goldmine version of everything. But yeah. But some of the original songs are, I think, blend. Okay, wait. Actually, before I say original songs, Ballad of Maxwell Demon is an original song.
Yep.
Okay. Is Hot One an original song?
Hot One is, I want to say yes.
Okay.
But it's a riff on a lot of Bowie's glam. Like,
okay.
I've got the track listing right here, and yeah, Hot One is credited to Nathan Larson from Shudder to Think, but it is referencing time. Ballad of Maxwell Demon is like so heavily all the young dudes.
Yes.
But in a way that is slippery and interesting and appropriate, right? Like they don't feel like pastiches, they feel like tributes in a way that I find really interesting. And then you just get to have there's that other one, the whole shebang, the Grantley Buffalo song, which isn't a Bowie song, but kind of wants to be in a way that feels really earnest and sweet.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, I love that song. That's a really fun scene because that's like when he first this is like a first big thing, right? When Brian Slade becomes Brian Slade.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great moment. Yeah, I love that one. Yeah, it's a killer soundtrack.
Yeah, and then the one person in the movie who never sings, well, I guess Arthur doesn't sing, he kind of mouths along at one point, but is Mandy, is Toni Collette, who we haven't really talked about, but who is also perfectly cast as someone who, I don't know that she exists as a person to the characters. Like Mandy is constantly being shoved to the side and ignored and cheated on and abandoned, and she keeps asserting herself in this really weird, brassy American with a borrowed accent kind of way, to the point where at the very end, her cabaret act, she's defined as the divine Miss Mandy, which is like, are you supposed to be Bette Midler? Because Bette Midler would never have been seen in this world. Like she would be adjacent to it. She'd be aware of it. But it's this one thing where if that is the reference and it's not supposed to be, Angela Bowie or anyone else from the world,
Hmm.
it's just, it's Haynes stapling her in a really weird and interesting way, because the idea of Bette Midler, who's, has a massive queer following and was always, interacting with the gay community in the 70s and 80s and on Broadway and Fiddler on the Roof and all this other stuff. Like, that's not who this person is. That's not who this character is. But she is fascinating to imagine as somebody with that energy who also, because of whatever alternate universe we're in, never had that career. So the
Hmm.
energy has to go somewhere. And here it pours into that one scene in when she crashes the bedroom and can't get the door to open and just like breaks open with this rage and this pain. I always underestimate Toni Collette in the 90s, because it's like people didn't know what to do with her. She'd come out of Muriel's Wedding and everybody wanted her to do more comedy and more broad stuff. And then Todd Haynes just casts her in this role where you're not really supposed to laugh at her and you're meant to underestimate her.
Hmm.
And then she just blows the doors off the place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even with her bit with her accent always kind of slipping, like we're kind of like, oh, like you're kind of one of these fakers in this world. And then like as the movie progresses, you just like start to like you feel so much for her. She kind of starts as like this like, party girl, kind of fluffy, all
Mm.
these, she just wants to be a part of everything. And then she just gets like so thrown around in the film. And by the end, she's just this like incredibly sympathetic character who has this like very real kind of breakdown. And yeah, she's fantastic in this movie. I love Toni Collette. I think this is one of my favorite performances, honestly. I think it has so many peaks and valleys to it. I think she gets to show so much in this movie. I read this because I always read the IMDb trivia facts after I watch a movie.
Oh
And
yeah.
I saw one of them was that Todd Haynes was, considering different people for this role, and she faxed him like just a piece of paper that said, "I am Mandy Slade." And Todd Haynes, it struck him that that was something that Mandy would do. This kind of like demand to like be seen. I think that's really cool. She totally kills this role. I love her. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next year she does The Sixth Sense and gets the Oscar nomination, and everybody just instantly legitimizes her. It's like, nope, here, she was doing it here.
Yeah, this broken mother. Yeah, she just like her range is crazy. That's what we were saying when we were watching it the other night. It's like, wow, I can't believe she did The Sixth Sense the year after this. Here she is, this London party girl and this beautiful role and this crazy range that she has. And then the next year, I mean, Shop is an incredible performance as well in Sixth Sense, but it's, this mother who's at the end of her rope, and it's a totally different tone.
Oh yeah, no, I mean The Sixth Sense is muted in a way that nothing in Velvet Goldmine wants to be.
No, yeah, Velvet Goldmine. Yeah, we haven't talked about the opening like slug at the beginning of the movie that said, even though this is a work of fiction, it must be played at maximum volume. Yeah, this movie, no world where anyone in this movie is meek or shying away. Even the meekest character in the movie, it would be like Shannon. She comes in as the costume girl or the fashion girl. I can't remember what her role was,
Yeah,
but
I think she applies for a secretarial position and is immediately the wardrobe mistress for a tour.
yes. Yeah, exactly. They're like, no, you're gonna do this. And even her, who's like kind of presented as this like meekest character who's being kind of guided, this like innocent person who's being shown what the world is, she also kind of ends up being this like loud person who's commanding a lot of attention. Yeah, there's not a quiet thing about this movie, that's for sure. Nothing muted.
Yeah. So this does bring us around to you talked about its influence on your own work and your own vision of editing. But is there anything specific that you've lifted or borrowed or stolen? I couldn't think of a moment in Paying for It where it's edited the same way. I mean, Paying for It is like a singer-songwriter work as opposed to a big glam ballad or something. But is there
Yeah.
something that you've applied it to in your own work?
Um, Not necessarily with Paying for It, because like you said, Paying for It's a very it's like a beautiful, like quiet film. And um, I think that it was an interesting film for me because I do think my style leans so bombastic and big, and this movie doesn't and paying for it doesn't really call for that. But had those really fun moments, obviously, with the Max Music or Much music video moments, which I love. And I loved paying for it. It was so fun, and Sook-Yin is great. I'd say though that like a movie that really I actually realized I probably did steal directly from Velvet Goldmine from is another feature I cut last year called We Forgot to Break Up. And there's a scene in Velvet Goldmine where it's I can't even remember the moment now, but it's intercutting a sex scene with a performance, and the montage of sex and music is something that I did many times, and We Forgot to Break Up. I loved that, and I remember that wasn't necessarily in the script, but I remember one day, I asked Karen Knox, who directed We Forgot to Break Up. I was like, I just need like a moment to like figure out how to like transition from this scene where these kids are making out or they're at a bar, and then this other scene where they're performing, and so I took like half an hour and I just kind of edited it so that there's these like orgasmic sounds cutting between performance, and that's ended up being in the movie. And I think that that's when I have moments where I get to do that with editing, it's really fun. And I wasn't directly thinking of Velvet Goldmine when I was cutting We Forgot to Break Up, but I did actually tell Knox to watch Velvet Goldmine because it's also, a story of a band or coming up, and it's very queer and lots of performance. But yeah, I'd say that that's probably the most Velvet Goldmine moment in my editing career is probably from We Forgot to Break Up.
You want to build on this and keep doing it and or go in different directions? I mean, is this a flavor that you particularly enjoy using, or because it's such a fascinating thing? Editors are always dependent on projects, right? Like unless you're making the movie yourself, you don't get to choose which directions you go in. But do you plan like a specialized? Would you want to do something like that? Be the rock movie editor?
My rock movie editor. I mean, it does seem like I've kind of found like a little bit of a niche. I mean, I started editing as a music video editor, so it kind of all started with that. And that feels really natural to me, but I definitely want to cut everything. I, in particular, have always wanted to cut a sci-fi. I also grew up with Star Wars, and I would love to cut a space opera. I think that would be so fun. And I love to do it all, but I think that the musicality of editing is something I'll always kind of be drawn to, whether it has to do with music or not. I was really influenced when I was younger by Hot Fuzz and seeing Hot Fuzz and the editing style of Chris Dickens, which is very kinetic, very snappy. And obviously that comes from, it comes from more of the director of those films. Like that's a style that they set out to do. And then Chris Dickens took it on and refined it, I guess. But it is kind of an interesting thing to be an editor because you are a key creative, but it's not necessarily about you. It's not about you, obviously. Right. It's really fun when you get to have these moments where it feels like like I'm on the screen, like I see myself on the screen, like this is me. It's really fun when you get those moments, but they're not as common. But it is fun when they happen. And I see myself definitely in paying for it as well, which isn't, this big bombastic, super cutty film. But, I see it in these little pieces. And, Sook-Yin and Dylan Gamble, they've composed the whole score of Paying for It together. And that was really fun for me because, we would be putting down these pieces into the film and we would say, oh, like, I wish we had this be like a little bit more up tempo so we could do this, or I wish that didn't have this high note. And Sook-Yin would go home and then come back the next day into the edit suite and she would have that version of the music. So it really was like, Paying for It doesn't necessarily immediately present itself as like this big musical movie, but in my heart, it kind of had all this big musical editing because every day we were refining and molding the music. It was so cool to be able to do that kind of on the fly because that just never happens. By the time we picture locked, we also music locked. Like that was crazy. That was super fun. And it doesn't necessarily present as a big movie about music, but music has definitely played a big role, at least in the editing process. So I will always love paying for it for that.
My thanks to Anna Catley, the editor of Paying For It, which is now playing at the Scotiabank Theatre in Toronto and returning to the TIFF Lightbox on Sunday, February 9th for its Canada's Top 10 screening on the way to other playdates across the country. You can follow the film schedule at payingforitfilm.com. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Anna on Instagram at Anna Catley, all one word, and while all the physical editions of Velvet Goldmine have long since been out of print, you can buy it and rent it on various VOD services in the US and Canada. It just doesn't look as good. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.